many are still grieving. Some families will be lost to one another forever. To those of you who face the difficulties of reconnecting with family and establishing ongoing relationships, we say sorry. We offer this apology in the hope that it will assist your healing and in order to shine a light on a dark period of our nation's history. To those who have fought for the truth to be heard, we hear you now.
You're listening to Adopt Perspective podcast, a podcast for anyone affected by adoption. I'm your host and president of Jigsaw Queensland, Jo Sparrow. This podcast is a production of Jigsaw Queensland Post-Adoption Support Service. However, the views expressed are those of the people participating and not necessarily Jigsaw Queensland. The podcast discusses adult themes and listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Adopt Perspective. I'm your host and president of Jigsaw Queensland, Jo Sparrow. On March 21st, 2013, Prime Minister Julia Gillard delivered a formal apology on behalf of the Australian government to people affected by forced adoption. This was a response to the recommendations in the Senate report on the Commonwealth contribution to former forced adoption policies and practices. As our listeners know, we share parts of that apology at the beginning of every Adopt Perspective episode. Today marks the 12th anniversary of the National Apology. Here in Queensland, Jigsaw is proud to be hosting a special commemoration at Victoria Park Function Venue, which will also be streamed online. And you can find that link to the live stream on our Facebook page today. At the 10th anniversary commemoration in Canberra in 2023, the Honourable Amanda Rishworth, Minister for Social Services, announced $700,000 in funding to strengthen support services for those impacted by forced adoptions. This additional funding led to the development of the Forced Adoption Practical Skills and Awareness online training, which launched in November 2024. This online course, available via the Department of Social Services website, is designed to support those who work with adults impacted by forced adoption, helping them better understand its history and lifelong effects. Today, I'm speaking with representatives from two of the organisations behind the training to learn about the intricate process of developing what is an outstanding and deeply valuable resource, one that has the potential, I think, to educate far beyond its intended audience. It's my pleasure to welcome Patrick Beggs, founder and managing director of Per Production, and Beth Hyland, strategy design lead from Portable. Patrick and Beth, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us.
Before we dive into the details of the training, I'd love to hear a little bit about each of you and your organisations. Like, what does your organisation do? What is your role? And what drew you guys to this type of work? Might start with Patrick.
Oh, thanks, Jo. Per Production, the hint is in the name, production, but we started out, it's a long journey. We hinted at per is picking up rocks, and it's, I suppose, just picking up perspectives and looking at them in different ways. And that's landed us on a long journey and to sort of where we are, where we specialise in creating educational material. And my into that is just, I suppose, how impactful education has been in my life and how you can find it in lots of different ways and how much that is changing. And so, working on something like this was really beautiful to be able to do. It was a great opportunity, but I, to be honest, learned a lot. So here we are. So thanks.
Thanks, Patrick. How about you, Beth?
So I work for an organisation called Portable, which is a design and technology agency with a mission to do work that helps to address areas of social need and policy failure. So we're a very sort of purpose-led organisation. And my journey to Portable, I guess, is probably starting from a background of just strong social justice kind of values throughout my life. And that really brought me into a career in social innovation and design. And I've been working in that area for the past decade, really, on a really wide range of different projects. But this one's been a particularly really fulfilling piece of work to be on. So excited to be here talking about it today.
Oh, I love that. I love both of your reasons for getting into this work. Now, as I understand it, there were two distinct parts to developing this training. Could you each explain your role that your organisation played in the process? And we might start with you this time, Beth.
Yeah, great. So I guess Portable's part of the work had a few different elements to it. I'd sort of summarize that as being about research and storytelling. So we had conversations with people who had a variety of different lived experiences with forced adoption. And our work was to really try and understand some of the nuances in those different experiences and recognizing that everybody's experience is quite different. And underpinning those are some common elements. So what we were really looking for was to understand some of the common threads for those people affected by forced adoption and try and work out ways to communicate that to an audience of aged care workers and people in the community services sector that could help them to kind of connect with and understand forced adoption, its impacts, and the things that they can do in their day-to-day work to be supportive of people who have been affected. So it was kind of, a research role, sort of a storytelling role, and kind of a translation role as well to make sure that the way that we were communicating things was also landing with the intended audience. Yeah, that's probably a pretty good summary.
That's a great summary. What about you, Patrick?
Yeah, the role was where we came on was post-research and sort of helping define where it needed to land, understanding who the audience was. But a lot of the work had been done around capturing a lot of the lived experience and a lot of the understanding of how this was meant to help others understand the plight of forced adoption and adoptees and people entering the aged care sort of sector as people who need that support. And the role that we really played there was a little bit of the condenser. There's a lot of research and there's a lot of different ways that you can take this. And it can often be a little bit confronting just around how much information is there and what story you tell and how you tell that story. And we sort of came in and helped. We always describe it as sort of going up brief and help brief to what we think the medium would work for this, understanding who the audience was, which was aged care sector workers who were coming to this issue maybe first time. That was sort of the understanding that we were coming from, and time poor. So how do you create empathy early on, and how do you tell the story with integrity, and then also leave people with something that can actually impact the lives of those people who they're with. And we always turn to how narrative plays in that. So how do you embed a story across all of that, and started to work with Portable and the stakeholders to what that may look like, and then from sort of mapping that out and producing it out, we played the role as the animators and sort of helped shape a lot of the look and the feel of how it came across, and playing as that partner with Portable to help deliver that.
I always think storytelling and the creative process is kind of like an iceberg. Everyone ends up seeing the tip, but the absolute mammoth task that's underneath that to take so much information and condense it to bring out something that looks so simple and streamlined is just incredible.
Yeah, the iceberg's a good analogy.
But a nice iceberg, not a bad iceberg.
No, you're so right. And I think it's like, if an iceberg's done well, it's an invitation to sort of dig under if you want to and explore that. And Portable do really well at leading that breadcrumb approach, so people can understand and learn more if they want, or have that takeaway and have that impact. But yeah, the amount of research that went into this project is phenomenal. And then holding that perspective throughout was, from my perspective as per there and the ones working on that sort of creative look and feel, and the story there was really strong. And I think story is powerful when done well. And it was I think deadline really helped us a lot. I said that at the top when we did a recce, and I think it really helped because there was a lot of moving parts and a lot of stakeholders that had to agree with where this was heading. And lucky it's sort of landed. It's lovely to hear your praise, Joe, and hear from Jigsaw, and Jigsaw played a big role there and on the stakeholdership.
So Beth, when you were first briefed, what was your understanding of the knowledge gap in the aged care and community services sector, and what was the key objective of the training?
Yeah, great question. So I think this project was very much framed as being an information gap, and that's true. There is a gap in knowledge. I think even for us on the project, we had a very low level of awareness around this issue and kind of learned a lot about the history and how this came about in Australia. When we looked at the brief, though, I think one of the things that really stood out to us is that it's not just information that is the need that we're trying to meet here, that for this to help inform the things that people are doing in their day-to-day work, we really wanted to convey the information in a way that would connect with people and give them a sense of empathy, because that empathetic connection to this topic is the thing that I think then leads to a change in behaviours, a motivation and sort of an understanding of how to adjust and do things differently. Because when you stand in somebody else's shoes and make that kind of empathetic connection with them, and understand their experience, even if it's just a little bit from the inside, I think it's motivating, and it helps people to respond more sensitively in their own ways as well. So in the brief, we were also told that some training had been developed previously that was quite kind of academic and dry, and we knew that that was something we wanted to steer away from. We wanted to find a way of conveying information that would really connect with people and help them to, understand this issue in a meaningful way.
Oh, fantastic. You nailed it. I understand that collaboration, as you alluded to, was a major part of the development process. Why was this so important for a project like this?
Yeah, it's another really good question. I think the reason it's important is because people's experiences around this do vary a lot, and we really needed to identify a way of communicating it that would land with our target audience and also speak to the diversity of people's experiences. I was thinking when you raised the iceberg analogy earlier, that it's also true for what we did in the research, where you have different people's anecdotes and their narrative around what their experience is, and hearing from different people how they were affected by forced adoption. And there's all of these details that kind of live almost on the surface. And what we looked to do was kind of try and unpack and identify what is the signature underneath this experience? What are the common elements? What are the things that people are frequently expressing? And how can we convey that in a way that speaks to and resonates with people's experiences, even if the details from person to person are different? It should still feel emotionally kind of true to the experiences that people have had.
Yeah. Well, you've got a great understanding of things. Every answer you give me just shows how much you really got this. So who was involved in that collaboration and how did it take place?
A really long list of people. And I think this was one of the strengths of this project, was just having access to a range of different perspectives that helped us to immerse ourselves in an understanding of this world and the different impacts that people have experienced. So there was the Department of Social Services, first of all, who gave us the project, provided requirements, timeframes, ran the overall process. We had people with lived experience involved from the outset. So they attended interviews and shared their experiences very generously and openly with us, and really grateful for that, because that helped us to do that work of empathizing and connecting and kind of getting an understanding of those experiences. We had the advisory group who provided really invaluable direction, oversight, and helped us to pay attention to the different nuances, including in language, which is really, really important to people and something that we were really mindful of and sensitized through the work of the advisory group, which had representatives from forced adoption support services, as well as people with lived experience were on that group as well. We also worked with aged care and community service workers who were the target audience for this training. We interviewed them, and we also tested the resources we were creating with them to get their feedback on the scripts, on the animations, on the training modules themselves. We also had Blue Knot involved, who were a thought partner and helped us to kind of validate some of our trauma-informed approaches, a really good sounding board for us. NGNY, who is a First Nations consultancy, who gave us some advice around framing early in the piece as well. And I think that's not even an exhaustive list. I think there are probably a few other collaborators and people who were involved in helping us to get to the final product. But those are probably the people who played the biggest role in kind of shaping the content.
Sounds like a dream team, I think. So what insights did you gain from working with the advisory group?
Yeah, I think the advisory group helped us in firstly identifying priority areas of content. I think that was a really important input for us. So some of the things they helped us to understand is what the content really needed to speak to. One of the strengths I think in this training was that we identified some scenarios that essentially involved people affected by forced adoption and workers, either in an aged care or a community setting. And that helped us to essentially find a common scenario where someone watching that video would be able to connect with a role. And they helped us to identify what those topics would be, what those scenarios might be, help us understand the priorities, the things we needed to communicate about. And then I think a really important role in validating how we were communicating about this. So I think Patrick mentioned before, there's only a finite amount of time and attention you can get from an audience. So we had to really prioritize things. And I think it was really helpful to have the advisory group validate directions and give us a sense of what the right scenarios were to use, and also just refinement of ideas, refinement of the language that we were using in those different videos and the way that we were communicating about what was going on. I think one of the highlights on this project for me was around getting some feedback on some real nuances of language, and it was just really impressive the way that the advisory group could highlight, for example, that a particular phrase would imply a certain power dynamic or suggest something. And as soon as it's being pointed out to you, it makes sense and you can see it. But it's really interesting. You just have habits around the way that you use language. And even when you think you're being nuanced or paying attention to things, it was just really helpful to have the advisory committee there to pick up on those different details and make sure that we were doing a good job with our communication.
Excellent. So what was the ultimate goal of the training, and what were the key outcomes that you hope to achieve?
The ultimate goal of the training was to, and this was a standard we kind of held ourselves to, particularly when it comes to the animation. So the videos which Patrick worked on and Per helped us to animate were, I think, really some of the highlights of the training, really, because it's quite engaging and it is that storytelling element to the training. So the goal was to give people a first impression of forced adoption that would resonate with them. And the standard of a first impression was something that we held ourselves to because we knew that we couldn't tell every story and couldn't represent every aspect of forced adoption and its impacts. So that idea of we want this first impression to be really strong and to resonate with people. That was a standard that we held ourselves to. And we also wanted an element of practicality to the training. So at the beginning in the introduction, you spoke about this training being practical skills and awareness. And that was also a really strong goal, that we wanted this to be practical. So it wasn't just sort of a history lesson or telling people about the background, but it was helping them to connect that to things that they would need to do in their day-to-day work with a person. And even though, again, we could only include sort of illustrative examples of what those changes needed to be, we felt like that was the right way to go about it, because once you've got a sense of those things, it hopefully piques people's curiosity, gives them something practical to do with it, and encourages them to learn more in this space as well.
It certainly does. So, Patrick, storytelling played a huge role in the animated components of the training. Why was this approach so important?
It's so important because it carried a lot of the information, and as Beth described so well there, just the challenge that was set. And I think that sort of gold standard of who this was for and why it was for them helped be that sort of North Star in those tricky conversations, to be like, why are we doing it like this, and help the decision-making process. And then that helped on the story and the narratives embedded there. And so how we approached that was, how do we connect people to these stories? What's the best look? Originally, we were like, should it be podcast? Should it be video? Should it be people telling their story? How should it be? And sort of through that process and conversation, it was the understanding that the best way is probably taking that whole collection of narrative, and as Beth described there really well, was finding that commonality, and then how do you embed that? What's the best medium for that? And it was sort of creating a narrative throughout the modules that held everything, and that was a family that we landed on, so people could connect not just in one and then it was a different space, so people could flow through those modules and build up empathy as they went through and understand the character. They could see themselves in there within the story. And I think that was why everyone landed there. And then the challenge was how to build that in there. And not only, as Beth said so well there, tell sort of the history lesson, but also tell some, evidence-based ways to help people in aged care through this, and how to skill up, because that was also a big component there. How do you do that, and how do you do that empathy based? And I think story lends itself so well there, and it's something that can live in the ideal user's memory and be called upon in their own scenarios, whether it's exactly or it's something that's made them remember it, because it wasn't an accredited education component. So it's like, how do we land a story that can sort of sit in the back pocket, so to speak, and that was where we landed.
You've spoken online about creating characters with purpose in your work. Can you explain what that means and how it applied to this training?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Thanks for doing the back end work down, reading some of the paper trail. Character sort of touched on there, but character is used for education around how do you see yourself in the work, or how do you see yourself in what you're learning. I think that's when things start to really resonate, and you're not just, because there was no class setting where you could have a discussion. So how do you get skin in the game just through a story? And that's try and put characters in there that is going to resonate with people in their lives, whether they see themselves or they see a character in their life, and they can start to see their life played throughout that story. That sort of character design, and how we took the approach here was how to do that. And that's why we used family, and that's why we used a specific scenario, and to play it throughout.
Yeah, it's incredibly powerful throughout the whole training. It instantly engaged you. Like you said before, I think, Beth, it definitely puts you in the shoes of the characters. So one of the things that I found really impressive was how easy the training is to engage with. Nothing feels too overwhelming or too dense. So how did you achieve that balance?
Was once again sticking to some rules that we set out early on, was how long something had to be. So that was like creative parameters, I think, often a blessing and a curse, because it was, as you're well aware, it's a decent challenge to be able to convey sort of the problems and challenges that lie here. but having that North Star and then setting creative parameters around what are we trying to convey in this module, how can we say it like that, and then also understanding attention spans and meeting the user where they are. And these, the research shows are pretty time poor individuals, under-resourced. So what's going to sit there? Are they going to be watching this in a lunch break? They're not getting support to watch this in terms of paid on time. So how do you enable that best? So really understanding the challenge that's there. You know, you could do a documentary and that has its place as well. But for this challenge, it was making it bite-sized and maybe sit in with a social feed that they've been consuming in that lunch break. So that's that phrase of meeting the user where they are and be able to sit through that. And at the top, we really spoke as we went through the scripting was how do you sort of promise what you're going to deliver in the first 15 seconds and then be able to deliver to that so the audience knows what they're getting in for, and then you extrapolate out on that and then leave some key takeaways so people can go and finish their lunch break and be able to help people in a more impactful, informed way. And that was really the bare bones of where we were and how we had to approach it.
I understand, as you said earlier, that feedback was integrated continuously throughout the production process. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the feedback was amazing to be able. Beth described at the top who was involved and omitted a few, but it was extensive, and to have feedback live and how it was delivered within that stakeholder group was actually presenting it live. They hadn't seen it. There was sign off. There was a big extensive process on character originally, so just like a static images around who was involved, how they're involved, and then when it got to actually watching back, the story played out and the modules played out. It was done that way, and then so you'd play the modules, and that was where I think for myself, hearing the stakeholders really pick up language, and that's when we knew script as well would start to hit in a different way, and that's when script and nuance and context started to really drive home, because you could start to see, people working in the space could start to see problematic things coming out, and you could start to pick it apart and pick up things that everyone would have tripped on. And so that was beautiful to be able to have, and for everyone to feel like they were part of the creation of this, which they were from the very get-go to the very end. So that was integral to be able to hit that and hit it well.
Yeah. Which for a disenfranchised group of people, which is the forced adoption community, is so important to be involved and to feel like you said before, we have skin in the game, and that it's something that we've had input into that's really important. So what are you most proud of in your role in this project?
Most proud to get kudos from the selves like yourself, Joe, to hear that that this is hitting a mark, that it represents some of that story and problem and history, and then moving forward in a way that you hold valid. Like that's the biggest, I suppose, accreditation that it's actually, you can see value in it. That's massive.
Beth, we talked a little bit before about how the training was tested. Can you tell us a bit more about the kind of feedback that you received during that process?
Yeah, so testing was so crucial for this, because as we're trying to communicate these stories with care in a way that connects with people and makes it actionable, so much of what we're looking to do is be aware of the meaning that these stories will trigger for people. And it's both mindful of the context of our audience, of our aged care and community service workers, and what associations they will have when we use a particular phrase or set up a particular scenario. And we want that to ring true with them, because the moment something starts ringing false, that's when you lose people and they disconnect. So much of our work was trying to get an awareness of how people would interpret different things. And that started even at the very beginning of the process with our team, where we were writing each a version of a scenario and playing that out to each other, reading it aloud and getting feedback from the other people in the team to say, what are you hearing with this? Is there anything that's jarring? What is landing well? What is connecting with you, and trying to take the best bits of the different ways we were communicating that and then bringing that to a broader audience. So sharing the scripts that we'd come up with per production, and also with the advisory committee to understand more about language, and then again testing it more broadly with workers and hearing what they were hearing in the stories and what was connecting for them. And as we went through, we started to get our training materials to greater levels of fidelity. So there was the animations themselves, which went from script all the way through to fully realized animations. But those videos also live within training modules themselves that have written content. There's some interactive pieces. So there's quite a few layers to what this training actually is, and making that come together in a coherent way was one of our challenges as well, to make sure that there was enough sort of richness in what we were presenting, but also that it was simple enough and that it was being reinforced so that people are going through a learning experience as they're moving through the modules. So those were all things that we were trying to kind of keep in mind as we were testing things with people.
Yeah, absolutely. What I'm just loving hearing from you both as we talk about is just the compassion with which you both approach this as organisations, which isn't something I've heard a lot. So Beth, can you describe the final product for the people who haven't seen it yet, and what can participants expect when they engage with the training?
Yeah, so the final product is a series of modules, each with a particular focus. There is, as I was saying, sort of some written content as well as animated videos that are embedded in it. There are a few reflection questions at the bottom. There are some attachments in terms of further training and resources that people can look at, so that our idea was that we wanted people to be able to engage at different levels of depth. So even if you just watched the video series, that there should be a good amount of learning in that for people, but there are additional layers and more detail that people can get into if they want to.
Yeah. So since the training launch, which is always nervous for anyone that's putting out something new into the world, what feedback have you got from participants, and has it met your expectations?
So I would say we've had a really positive response from people who have engaged with the training. And before it was launched, we did some market testing. So had conversations with people from our target audience to get their reactions to it. And that testing was looking at things like people's level of engagement, interaction. Did they know something they didn't know at the beginning, at the end? Would they be motivated to learn and train to share this training with other people? Would they apply it in their work? And that was really, really encouraging. We got great feedback from people around that. And I think that is partly because in some ways there's a low baseline level of knowledge. So in some ways, this training product is just a timely piece of information. And people are naturally kind of interested in this and want to learn more because it's a bit of an unknown for lots of people. But I also think it's because the storytelling is, as we've said, like quite accessible. And we've aimed to really make it plain English and try and find a way of communicating this that connects emotionally with people as well. So I think in terms of it meeting our expectations, I would say I haven't seen the most recent numbers in terms of engagement, but I think that's the thing that I hope for is like good adoption of this and lots of people engaging with it. I know that it's hosted in 2 places at the moment. So it's on the Department of Social Services website. It's also on the aged care training website. There's a central hub for that training. So it's hosted in 2 places. And just hopeful that we'll see some organic growth in this over time and people engaging with it more. And that is one thing that I'm encouraged by from the testing as well, is people saying that they would share it with colleagues because people get there's some related topics that people get training on, like trauma-informed care is becoming a really big topic and something that people are very interested in. And this is a really applied case of some really applied training around that hopefully helps that broader training to land in quite a specific way for people.
I hope this episode can help spread the word too, so that
Absolutely.
sharing it with the professionals in their lives. I can't imagine that working on a project like this doesn't have a personal and an organisational impact. So I'd like to ask you both how this project has impacted each of you personally and within your organisations.
Yeah, personally, it was a huge eye-opener. We did some work at the Collingwood Children's Farm not long ago, a historical project around sort of the transition between the state being responsible from the church being responsible for care, but peeling back a layer into here and really understanding the plight. I always heard whispers, even in, family circles and things, but this is a topic that, to be honest, hadn't, really been openly discussed about in my life until now. And so I'm personally really thankful for that knowledge and now a lot more understanding of the plight and just what's gone on and continues to go on. And then from an organisational point of view, just understanding how impactful words and how you say them, but more what can be done in a space and how to work with others to be able to, push a needle a little bit further, understanding that you're not going to solve a whole problem, but it's just to play a small role and to help in some small way if you can. That's been something that, we've learned from this project, or it's been iterated pretty strongly.
Beth?
Yeah, I think for me, getting into this topic was, as Patrick said, a real eye-opener. And I think something that stood out to me really early was just recognizing the significance of, it's a disruption to your closest family relationships. And I think that many people are lucky enough to take that for granted. And I think sometimes that something like this that really affects people, others can be surprised by the emotion involved if they haven't had the experience themselves. And so I think throughout the research, and I'll speak for the team at Portable as well, we felt a real combination of privilege of being invited into some really sensitive and vulnerable places with people as they spoke to us about their experience and how that had affected them. And then combined with a real sense of responsibility. So we had a real desire and motivation to do the best job we could do of expressing this experience and trying to help other people relate and connect to it. And I think there's a reality of arriving at compromises, because I think in creative work, in anything, there's always a limit to kind of how much you can get done. And even with language, there's a limit to the number of words we have to express things. And there's subjectivity in how different words will be received by people as well. So I think, you go into this work and end up feeling a bit vulnerable yourself as well, because you know that there's not going to be a perfect expression of things and not a perfect storytelling, and that there will be things that maybe don't land perfectly with people. But I think I feel really privileged to have been a part of this work, and quite proud at where we did arrive at, because I think that the combination of the storytelling and all of the feedback that we got from people to try and improve that and make that as good as we could make it, and then seeing it brought to life in animations, I think the visual work that was done by Per to help convey some of the emotion that can't always be communicated in words was really amazing. And I felt really moved watching the animations myself, and I'm optimistic that it will also move people in the aged care sector and in the community service sector. And I think if the work does move people, I feel like even if there are some imperfections in it, we've done a good job to give people that compelling first impression of the topic.
Language so often fails in the face of trauma. It's so hard to find the words to circle a trauma and make it alive, but you guys did a marvelous job. And I hope you're really proud of the fact that you do use your talents to do such meaningful work, because you could use it in any kind of space, but you use it to actually make a difference. So I hope you're both very proud of yourself.
Thanks, Jo. That's lovely to hear.
So I have to say that I was beyond impressed with the final training. It exceeded my expectations in every way. And our past CEO, Dr. Trevor Jordan, was part of that advisory group, and he had nothing but positive feedback about the process and the outcome. So congratulations again on an outstanding job.
Thanks so much, Jo.
That's lovely to hear. Trevor did really well in there. It was great to work with him.
Yeah, completely.
Very wise man.
Yeah.
So thank you both for joining me today and sharing these insights into such an important project. And for our listeners, if you'd like to access the Forced Adoption Practical Skills and Awareness Training, you can find the link on the Department of Social Services website. Just search for Forced Adoption. And as Beth said before, it's also on the Aged Care Training Hub as well. So please be sure to share that with any of the professionals in your life. And as I said, I think it's got the scope to go way beyond just those groups. So please share it widely. So I'd like to highlight here also another suite of incredible video resources whose creation was led by Intercountry Adoptee Voices and funded by Relationship Matters and the New South Wales Committee on Adoption and Permanent Care. And it was supported by the Australian Government Department of Social Services. And the videos were aimed at professionals such as teachers, doctors, and counsellors. And they were released back in 2021. And they're also a really wonderful education resource that you can find on the intercountryvoices.com website. And for anyone tuning in, remember that every adoption experience is unique, and it's never too late to begin your own explorations. And if you're looking for more resources, support, or simply a space to share, Jigsaw Queensland is here to help. And if you'd like to support the podcast, leave us a review, share our episodes, or let us know what you think by emailing or calling us, because we really love to hear from you. And if you have a story that you'd like to share with us and you'd like to be interviewed for the podcast, just jump onto the main podcast page of the Jigsaw Queensland website and complete the prospective guest form that you'll find there. And just note that Adopt Perspective can be and is listened to by people all over the world. I'm Jo Sparrow. Bye for now. Thanks for listening to the Adopt Perspective podcast. If you'd like to find out more, go to the podcast page on www.jigsawqueensland.com and you'll find a wealth of information and resources on the website. If you reside in Queensland, you can reach Jigsaw Queensland's Forced Adoption Support Service on toll-free 1800 210313, or you can call Jigsaw on 07 33 58 6666. If you live in another state of Australia, you can still call the Forced Adoption Support Service number, and your call will be answered by the Forced Adoption Support Service in the state that you're calling from. In every other state, Relationships Australia operates this service. A big thank you to Matt Sparrow for composing and recording our original theme music. Until next time, I'm Jo Sparrow saying farewell from Adopt Perspective, a podcast for anyone affected by adoption.